In the early hours of May 3rd, 2025, the crack of a shot pierced the pre-dawn quiet of a college neighborhood in Columbia, South Carolina. By sunrise, 22-year-old Logan Federico, an aspiring teacher visiting friends for the weekend, lay dead, and a horrifying crime spree was unfolding around her. What began as a fun Friday night gathering had turned into a nightmare by dawn. Logan had traveled to Columbia to spend the weekend with friends near the University of South Carolina campus. After a fun night out, they returned to a rented house on Cypress Street just before 3 that early Saturday morning. Not long after, as the friends settled in to sleep, an intruder quietly slipped into the neighboring house and rummaged for valuables. Police say the man entered the room where Logan slept and fatally shot her in the chest during the break-in. It all happened in the darkness, without warning. A young life taken in an instant. Logan's friends didn't immediately realize the horror that had unfolded. It wasn't until later that morning that someone discovered Logan unresponsive, and a 911 call alerted authorities to her body. Investigators quickly determined that Logan was an unintended victim and that she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. As detectives processed the scene on Cypress Street, they soon realized Logan's slaying was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger crime spree. And the more you hear about this sick puppy who committed these acts, the more you're going to wonder what sort of system let this guy out to begin with. The suspected shooter was identified as Alex Dickey, a 30-year-old man with an extensive criminal history. In fact, Dickey was already wanted on numerous warrants at the time of the attack. On that same morning, he had already broken into the house next door, stealing keys, credit cards, and even a firearm, before targeting the home where Logan slept. Authorities believe the attack on Logan was completely random, a byproduct of Dickey's desperate string of burglaries. After shooting Logan, Dickey fled the scene immediately. He stole a car using the keys taken from the first burglary and sped off into the dawn. With stolen credit and debit cards in hand, he drove to nearby West Columbia and embarked on an ill-advised, fraudulent shopping spree. And seriously, this is one of those moments where we just have to be thankful that most criminals are so stupid. This pointless act of post-killing consumerism would thankfully stop him from inflicting further serious harm. He bought numerous items with his victims' stolen credit cards and left an ample trail of transactions for police to follow. Dickey was also apparently unfamiliar with this new technology called a surveillance camera, which depicted him making these purchases. Dickey's crime spree didn't stop there. Later that day, he drove the stolen car out of town into rural Saluda County, South Carolina. As he attempted additional illicit purchases, the stolen vehicle broke down and left him stranded on the roadside. Undeterred, Dickey brazenly called a towing company to haul the broken car to a friend's residence in the small town of Gaston. Honestly, at this point, I'm surprised he didn't just have it towed to his own house. And yeah, this would be a comedy if it wasn't so damn tragic. By then, Columbia police had traced the suspect's path through his spending spree and the stolen car report. They coordinated with the Lexington County Sheriff's Office and state agents from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division to zero in on the Gaston location. When officers arrived on Sunday, May 4th, Dickey fled into nearby woods to evade capture, turning the manhunt into a tense overnight search. Through Saturday night and into Sunday, authorities scoured the area for the armed fugitive. Despite severe weather conditions hampering the search, law enforcement remained in pursuit. The break came around 4 p.m. on Sunday, May 4th, when a resident in Lexington County spotted a suspicious man emerging from the woods. At the same time, there was a report of yet another stolen vehicle in the area, but he crashed the vehicle shortly after. In a bizarre attempt to avoid arrest, Dickie forced his way into that home in Gaston where his friend was staying. The cops tracked him down and he refused to surrender peacefully, so officers from multiple agencies surrounded the house. A tense standoff ensued as they ordered the intruder to come out. In a final reckless act, Dickie set the house on fire while barricading himself inside. Police weren't about to let the suspect escape again. They moved in as flames began to spread, eventually pulling Dickie out through a window to safety before taking him into custody. Remarkably, no one else was harmed in the fire. Dickie was immediately transported to a hospital for treatment of minor injuries and smoke inhalation, then released straight into police custody. Just about 36 hours after Logan's life was taken, this sick predator was behind bars. With Dickie in custody, investigators began unraveling the full extent of his crime spree. It was also revealed that Dickie was a career criminal who had been charged with nearly 50 prior crimes over the past decade. He had multiple felony convictions and had spent time in prison, yet he was free that weekend to wreak havoc. This revelation only deepened the tragedy, raising questions about how someone with such a record was walking the streets. In the days following the slaying, Logan's family and the Columbia community grappled with grief and anger. At a press conference on May 5th, Logan's father, Stephen Federico, stood alongside police officials, clutching a photo of his daughter and fighting back tears as he spoke. He described Logan as a vibrant, caring young woman who worked 2 jobs while attending college, with the dream of becoming an elementary school teacher. Authorities wasted no time charging Alex Dickie in connection with the crime spree and Logan's slaying. Columbia police obtained warrants accusing him of the attack, multiple counts of burglary, several weapons charges, grand larceny, and fraud. Additional charges for arson and other offenses were filed in neighboring Lexington County, reflecting the blaze and break-ins there. A judge swiftly denied Dickie bond, ensuring he would remain jailed as he awaited trial. Given the shocking nature of the crime, South Carolina's Attorney General even suggested the case might warrant federal attention and urged prosecutors to consider the death penalty. At present, this is where we stand, and Logan's case has become a rallying cry against a system that has failed to protect innocent people from repeat violent offenders. There's no way around the hard truth in this case. Logan Federico should still be alive. Her death wasn't the result of some unforeseeable lightning strike, but the predictable outcome of a system that repeatedly released a violently unstable offender back into the public. Alex Dickie didn't suddenly snap that weekend. His record showed years of escalating violence, disregard for the law, and an inability to function safely in society. When someone racks up nearly 50 prior charges, including serious felonies, the question isn't how this happened. It's why it was allowed to happen. Every prior release was a gamble made with other people's lives, and Logan paid the price for that systematic indifference. In my view, justice for Logan can't stop at conviction alone. It has to include accountability for the failures that put her in danger to begin with. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to share this video with your friends and family. Also, just a quick reminder that I do have 2 other channels to check out as well, one dealing with unsolved mysteries and the other with historical subjects. For nearly 44 years, the mystery of who killed 16-year-old Pamela Moorer haunted a quiet Illinois suburb. The teenager's 1976 slaying remained unsolved until a breakthrough in forensic technology finally unmasked the perpetrator in a way that no one could have imagined in the 70s. This revelation not only closed a painful chapter for Pamela's loved ones, but also exposed a suspected serial predator who had lurked in plain sight. On a cold January night in 1976, Pamela Moorer left a friend's house in Woodridge, Illinois, to buy a meal at a nearby McDonald's. When she didn't return home as expected, her mother reported her missing by late that night. The next morning, a road crew found Pamela's body abandoned beside a road in Lyle. The high school sophomore had been strangled and subject to an indecent assault, her life tragically snuffed out by a brutal attacker. The community was stunned by the violence inflicted on this shy, studious teenager. Police launched an intensive investigation, interviewing friends and classmates in hopes of identifying a suspect. At the time, the police chief vowed they would find Pamela's killer, but that promise would take decades to fulfill. Despite the investigators' efforts, no arrests were made, and the case eventually went cold. Months turned into years with no answers, leaving Pamela's family to endure decades of uncertainty and grief. But her case wasn't alone. It became one of several puzzling, unsolved slayings of young women in the county during that era. For decades, the question of who killed Pamela Maurer lingered. Investigators refused to forget the case, periodically revisiting the evidence as forensic science advanced. Crucially, authorities had preserved biological evidence from Pamela's body, collected long before DNA profiling existed. In 2001, forensic analysts finally extracted a DNA profile of the unknown suspect from the preserved evidence. However, when this profile was run through the national database, it yielded no matches. In hindsight, the reason was simple. The killer had never been convicted of a crime and was already dead by then. With no hit on the genetic material and no other strong leads, Pamela's case remained unsolved well into the new century. Her family could only hold on to the hope that someday new technology or information would bring answers. The breakthrough in Pamela's case finally came in 2019 with cutting-edge DNA analysis and genetic genealogy. DuPage County investigators worked with a private lab to apply advanced testing to the old evidence. Genetic genealogy works by comparing crime scene DNA to profiles that relatives voluntarily share on public databases. This, in turn, allows distant family matches to point toward an unknown suspect who can then be confirmed with a direct test. It's not a perfect system by any means, and issues like adoption or the perpetrator not being from a select few countries like America or Canada can be major hindrances. Thankfully, this wasn't the case here, and the team built a family tree of possible relatives and narrowed their search to a single name: Bruce Lindell. Identifying Lindell on paper was only the first step. Investigators needed concrete proof. In late 2019, Lindell's body was exhumed under a court order, and his DNA was tested directly against the crime scene sample. The results provided the long-awaited definitive confirmation. It was also the first time in Illinois that this genetic forensic technique had been used to solve a cold case. After 44 years, science had finally put a name to the man who had cruelly brought an end to the life of this promising teenager. Detectives even traveled to Texas to inform Pamela's father and brother of the perpetrator's identity directly. Once unmasked, Bruce Lindell emerged as a frightening figure with a history of violence. At age 23, Lindell lived in the vicinity of Pamela's hometown and hadn't been on the police's radar in 1976. Starting in the mid-1970s, Lindell had several run-ins with law enforcement, from minor offenses to serious charges, but he often avoided significant consequences. This helped him stay under the radar as his crimes escalated. In the years that followed Pamela's death, Lindell's violence continued until a gruesome twist ended his life. He was arrested in 1980 for the kidnapping of a woman named Deborah Colliander, but she disappeared 2 weeks before the trial. She was later found slain, presumably at Lindell's hands. Investigators later learned Lindell had even tried to hire someone to kill Colliander to prevent her from testifying. In April 1981, Lindell's crimes caught up with him in a truly bizarre way. While stabbing 18-year-old Charles Huber to death, Lindell accidentally slashed his own femoral artery and bled out at the scene next to his victim. His death meant he would never face justice in a courtroom, but the truth of his deeds would eventually come to light. After Lindell died, police discovered numerous photographs of young women in his home, including one teenage girl who had gone missing in 1979. These findings raised suspicions that he had other victims beyond Pamela. Today, authorities believe Lindell was a serial predator responsible for far more crimes than were known during his life. Investigators suspect he may have killed as many as a dozen people and committed numerous indecent assaults across the Chicago suburbs in the 1970s. The full extent of his violence may never be definitively known, but solving Pamela's case has shed light on Lindell's deadly pattern. It was just past midnight on a quiet summer night in Tennessee when the calm of Cedar Creek Marina would be broken in the most disturbing and tragic way. This waterfront getaway on Old Hickory Lake near Nashville would suddenly become the scene of a violent crime. A young man who had simply pulled up with his boat became the unwitting target of a fleeing robber's gunfire. The senseless killing of 27-year-old Bailey Gardner in June 2024 shocked the Mount Juliet community and set off a determined investigation to bring his killer to justice. Late on the night of June 29, 2024, Cedar Creek Marina's popular restaurant had just closed when armed intruders struck. The suspects, a trio of armed robbers, waited until the staff were locking up, then ambushed the employees inside. They assaulted two staff members, who were treated by medics and released, and forced them to open the restaurant's safe before grabbing the cash and making a break for it. Outside, 27-year-old Bailey Gardner, a visitor from Kansas, was sitting in his vehicle with his boat on a trailer, unaware of the danger unfolding around him. As the robbers fled, they crossed paths with Gardner and opened fire, shooting him multiple times before vanishing into the night. Officers arrived within minutes to find Gardner slumped and unresponsive in his car, suffering from several gunshot wounds. They attempted life-saving measures as paramedics rushed in, but it was too late. Bailey Gardner perished from his injuries at the scene. The authorities were on extremely high alert, as it was instantly clear that Bailey hadn't tried to intervene in any way. He was simply cut down because he was a potential witness to the crime, despite all evidence pointing to him likely having no idea that a robbery was even in progress. The Mount Juliet community was stunned by the violence at a place known for leisurely weekends by the lake. Regular patrons expressed disbelief that such a crime could occur at their marina. In the immediate aftermath, law enforcement from the Wilson County Sheriff's Office and Mount Juliet Police Department flooded the scene to secure evidence. The robbers had turned an attack which would have only generated a modest amount of heat from the cops into a national story. Local authorities even enlisted help from state and federal agencies as needed, determined not to let the killers slip away. Again, I can't stress this enough. Had these robbers not decided to shoot a completely innocent man, they may have been able to get away with the crime. With substantial resources assigned, the cops were able to get surveillance evidence from a number of businesses. The footage reportedly showed one of the culprits, later identified as 40-year-old Adrian McLean, during the commission of the crime. Just over 2 weeks after the slaying, the breakthrough came. On July 17, 2024, authorities announced they had a suspect in custody, bringing an end to weeks of uncertainty and fear. The man arrested was 40-year-old Adrian McLean, who quickly became the prime focus of the investigation. McLean, originally from Jamaica, had been in the United States on a temporary visa that expired. A joint task force tracked McLean to a house in Nashville and took him into custody during a pre-dawn raid that same day. He was promptly charged for Bailey Gardner's death, along with 3 counts of aggravated robbery stemming from the holdup at the Marina restaurant. The arrest was a major relief for law enforcement and the anxious community, ending an intense manhunt that involved multiple jurisdictions. Authorities revealed that McLean had orchestrated the robbery with at least 2 accomplices, which confirmed the statements given by the witnesses that night. Despite this, only McLean went on trial, and the other 2 criminals remained at large. For Gardner's family, the trial in September 2025 was a long-awaited step toward justice, finally coming more than a year after the tragedy took place. A jury heard how McLean and his associates had planned the heist, and how Bailey Gardner was gunned down simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. After a multi-day trial, on September 18, 2025, the jury returned a guilty verdict for the slaying. McLean, by then 41 years old, was also convicted on all charges in connection with the Cedar Creek Marina robbery. He hasn't yet been sentenced, with that event scheduled for early 2026, but the conviction carries a mandatory life term. Even with McLean now headed to prison for life, the case isn't completely closed. Investigators believe that the 2 additional suspects who helped carry out the Marina robbery are still at large, and efforts to identify and capture them remain underway. Authorities have posted a $15,000 reward for information leading to those accomplices' arrests and prosecution. With Adrian McLean now convicted and facing a mandatory life sentence, authorities still have leverage points that could be used to pressure him into identifying his accomplices. And I'm going to discuss those before I get into a theory I have about what happened to them. One of the strongest tools is sentencing negotiation. While a life term is expected, prosecutors can offer to formally recognize substantial cooperation at sentencing. This could potentially influence future parole eligibility, which, given the fact that McLean is only 41, this must be weighing on his mind. They could also give him incentives to testify against his co-conspirators if they're captured as a result of his cooperation. Personally, I also question whether the authorities have done a full digital forensic search on everything related to the convict. I find it highly unlikely that in this day and age he had no digital communications whatsoever with his co-conspirators at any point before or after the attack. Honestly, though, I think he may have eliminated his co-conspirators after the death of Bailey. That's just a hunch, though. On a quiet Sunday afternoon in downtown Cleveland on March 24, 2013, 53-year-old Eliza Sherman walked toward her divorce attorney's office, expecting a routine meeting. Instead, she was ambushed and brutally stabbed just steps from the entrance in broad daylight. A grainy surveillance camera clip offered the only glimpse of the perpetrator, a blurred, masked figure dressed in dark clothing sprinting away from the scene. The motive behind this case, if the prosecution's allegations are correct, will go down as one of the most unusual motives in American criminal justice history. Detectives quickly honed in on Eliza's personal life for possible motives. The victim had been in the midst of a messy divorce with her estranged husband, Sanford Sherman, at the time of her death. This bitter legal battle had dragged on for years, and friends later recounted that Eliza was afraid and just wanted it over with. Naturally, Sanford came under scrutiny, but when police attempted to interview him, he refused to cooperate, hiring an attorney who shielded him from questioning. Investigators could never formally label him a suspect, and with no direct evidence tying him to the attack, that lead hit a dead end. Years later, Sanford would pass away in Florida, never having answered detectives' questions. The cloud of suspicion remained, but if he knew more about Eliza's death, he took those secrets to his grave. Under normal conditions, the authorities may have spent way more in the way of resources investigating Sanford, but this case was anything but normal. Another early focus of the investigation was Eliza's own divorce attorney, Gregory Moore, the very man she was on her way to meet. Almost immediately, something about Moore's behavior didn't sit right with Eliza's friends or the police. Eliza's best friend later revealed that on the day of the attack, Moore had oddly kept changing the meeting time and location for their appointment. This constant rescheduling raised questions about whether Eliza had been deliberately lured into a trap, and this is where things get really weird. Moore told investigators that he hadn't been at his downtown office at the time of the attack, but was somewhere else entirely. They found this to be unusual given that this is where he was supposed to meet his client at that exact time. Deepening suspicions, forensic analysis of cell phone records and building entry logs would later catch him in a web of deceit. Moore had sent text messages to Eliza just moments before and after the attack, claiming he was waiting inside his office, contrary to what he told the cops. Yet investigators discovered he was not actually in the building at that time based on the building entry logs. This contradiction was alarming. Eliza's own attorney had attempted to fabricate some sort of alibi, while also telling an obvious verifiable lie to the authorities. At the crime scene, other strange clues, or lack thereof, emerged. Besides the blurry video footage, physical evidence was scant. The attacker had been quick and efficient, leaving behind no weapon, and initially, no identifiable DNA or fingerprints. But investigators did notice anomalies that suggested a premeditated effort, likely involving multiple people. Critical surveillance footage from the building, about 20 minutes worth, had mysteriously been deleted immediately after the attack. Similarly, voicemails from the building's calling system, which Eliza might have used to reach Moore upon arrival, were found to have been erased. Taken together, it was very clear these weren't random glitches. They looked like deliberate acts of evidence tampering, and it appeared that someone with access had tried to blind the investigation from the very start. This was a devastating setback for detectives. In those first critical weeks, leads were scarce, and even some of the most crucial evidence had literally been wiped away by unknown accomplices. As the months turned into years, Eliza Sherman's case languished without an arrest. Investigators faced repeated dead ends and frustrating missteps that stalled progress. Gregory Moore, who remained a person of interest, continued to practice law for a time, giving an unfortunate double meaning to the term criminal attorney. In 2016, more than 3 years after the event, a grand jury finally indicted Moore, but not for the slaying itself, but for charges related to obstructing the investigation. He had lied to police about his whereabouts and role on the day of the attack, and investigators had uncovered even more unsettling behavior. Moore had a history of making bogus bomb threats to delay court proceedings. In fact, back in 2012, he had phoned in bomb scares to courthouse buildings as a tactic to postpone trials. This revelation painted a picture of a man seemingly terrified of facing courtroom showdowns and willing to commit crimes to avoid them. And hang tight, because this is what we call foreshadowing. By 2017, Moore pleaded guilty to charges of falsification for his lies to detectives and inducing panic for the bomb threats. He served a mere 6 months in jail, but this family attorney was thankfully quickly divorced from his license to practice law. However, with no further charges filed at the time, Moore walked free after his short jail stint, and the specter of Eliza's unsolved case continued to haunt investigators and her family. Behind the scenes, Cleveland detectives kept the file open, but were running out of angles. By 2021, with the 10-year mark approaching and the case still unsolved, the Cleveland police took a pivotal step. They handed the case over to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. The idea was to get fresh eyes and cutting-edge forensic technology involved. BCI's cold case unit, under the State Attorney General's office, had resources and analytical tools beyond the scope of the local department. This unit approached the case methodically, re-examining every piece of evidence and applying new technological techniques in DNA and digital forensics. Crucially, they were determined to find something that had been missed in the earlier investigation, and bit by bit, the cold case began to warm up. What local investigators had long suspected, the BCI team set out to prove. Cell phone technology, in particular, provided the long-awaited breakthrough. Every time a phone pings a cell tower or connects to Wi-Fi, it leaves a trace. Investigators discovered that on the day of the attack, Gregory Moore's phone behavior was anything but normal. For a critical 3-hour window around the time of Eliza's death, Moore's cell phone went dark. He had deliberately disconnected it from the network. This was a calculated move to avoid creating any cell tower location records, placing him near the crime scene. To seasoned detectives, that kind of silence spoke volumes. It was as if an invisible alarm bell rang. An ordinary person has no reason to power off their phone for the duration of an event such as this, unless they're trying to hide something. It made even less sense for Moore since he was a practicing lawyer at the time, and going dark while working made no sense, even if it was on a Sunday. The BCI team pieced together that right after the time of the stabbing, Moore powered his phone back on. While the initial investigators knew he made efforts to reach her right after, they didn't know that his phone had been off until a few moments after the completion of the deed. Notably, in the days following the slaying, Moore went so far as to obtain a new phone altogether, presumably to distance himself from any records on the old device. Such actions demonstrated an unusual level of planning and consciousness of guilt. Digital evidence wasn't the only puzzle piece that BCI re-examined. They revisited surveillance systems and building access logs with fresh scrutiny. Moore's keycard swipe into his office building was logged later that same evening after Eliza had been slain. This suggested he returned to the scene not long after the crime, possibly to retrieve evidence or verify that evidence had been destroyed by those who helped him out. With all that said, I led off by telling you the motive would be unusual, so let's get to it. Prosecutors now allege that Moore's motive was straightforward and disturbing. He wanted to delay or derail the divorce trial that was set to begin that week. This was a trial he was unprepared for or afraid to face, and as noted, he previously called in bomb threats to avoid trials. This educated professional allegedly concluded that slaying his own client was the solution to his problems. As mentioned, Moore had a documented history of drastic delay tactics, and in Eliza's case, investigators say he went to the most extreme act possible. The plan, according to the prosecutor's allegations, was originally to kidnap Eliza Sherman as a delay tactic to prevent her from appearing in court. Along the way, something went horribly wrong. Prosecutors believe that Moore changed his plans for reasons which are yet unknown. After 12 long years of uncertainty, the hard work of the cold case investigators finally paid off. In early May 2025, a Cuyahoga County grand jury reviewed the mountain of new evidence and returned a secret indictment charging Gregory Moore. Armed with this indictment, law enforcement moved swiftly. On May 24, 2025, the disgraced lawyer was extradited back to Ohio in handcuffs, ready to face the consequences of his alleged deeds. When the news of Moore's arrest broke, it sent shockwaves through Cleveland. At a court hearing in late May 2025, Moore, now 51 years old, pleaded not guilty to all charges. A judge ordered him held on a $2 million bond and demanded a DNA sample, while also forbidding any contact with the Sherman family. For now, Moore awaits trial and remains innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. In May 2021, a quiet suburban home in Athens, Greece became the scene of a nightmare. Police responding to an early morning call found 20-year-old Caroline Crouch lying lifeless on a bed. Her infant daughter was wailing beside her, and the family's puppy was found hanging by a leash from the rail of their stairs. Caroline's husband, 33-year-old Babis Anagnostopoulos, was discovered bound and gagged. He told officers that armed burglars had broken into their home, tied him up, and strangled his wife during a violent robbery. The shocking crime and the grieving husband's story gripped Greece and made headlines around the world. In the immediate aftermath, Anagnostopoulos painted a harrowing picture of the night's events. He claimed that a gang of masked intruders broke in around 4:30 that morning and tied him to a chair while demanding money. According to his initial statement, he had begged the burglars to spare their lives as Caroline, who was tied up in the attic bedroom with their 11-month-old daughter, screamed for help. The intruders, he said, showed no mercy, and they allegedly did terrible things to Caroline for an hour to force out the location of the family's cash and jewelry. Once she revealed where they were storing about 15,000 euros in cash and jewels, they eliminated Caroline and the puppy to send a message to Anagnostopoulos. His account of the home invasion was utterly chilling. Greek officials responded with unprecedented urgency. The Citizens Protection Minister called the crime a rare act of brutality that had shaken the nation. Within hours, the government posted a 300,000 euro reward for any information leading to the supposed robbers. This was an extremely unusual bounty in Greece, reserved only for the most heinous crimes. Multiple police units were assigned to the case, scouring security camera footage and local leads in hopes of tracking down the gang. As friends and neighbors rallied around Anagnostopoulos, a helicopter pilot by profession, he appeared devastated. He even delivered a tearful eulogy at Caroline's funeral while clutching their baby daughter in front of mourners. For over a month, he lived as the tragic widower, publicly lamenting that his child would grow up without her mother and urging police to catch the burglars who had invaded his home. Nearly 5 weeks into the investigation, with no trace of the gang in sight, digital forensics cracked the case wide open. Caroline had been wearing a smartwatch to bed, a device that silently recorded her heart rate and movements. When experts analyzed its data, they discovered a fatal clue. The watch showed that Caroline's heart had stopped well before 4:30 that morning. In fact, her vital signs flatlined earlier in the night, which meant she was slain before the time the intruders supposedly arrived. This was a glaring red flag. Investigators dug deeper. They retrieved data from Anagnostopoulos' own mobile phone and found that his device's activity didn't match his story. A fitness app on his phone recorded him moving around the house during the period he swore he was tied up and unconscious. Additionally, the home's security system yielded another damning piece of evidence. The memory card from the surveillance camera had been removed at 1:20 that morning. This was several hours before the husband said the burglars broke in. Inconsistencies like these turned the investigation on its head. The very technology that the couple had used in their daily lives had effectively become a silent witness to the crime. Faced with this new evidence, police realized with growing certainty that the horrific burglary was an elaborate cover-up. As one officer later put it, Anagnostopoulos had gone to extreme lengths to stage the scene, all to make it look convincing. The revelation was as stunning as it was disturbing. The grieving husband was now the prime suspect. On June 17, 2021, in a dramatic turn of events, police summoned Babis Anagnostopoulos for further questioning. They were armed with the incontrovertible data from Caroline's smartwatch and other devices. Officers had intentionally waited until after a memorial service on Alanissos, the island where Caroline grew up, to confront him. Just minutes before his arrest, and Agnostopoulos had been seen embracing Caroline's mother in a final show of faux sympathy. Under intense interrogation, it took only a few hours for the truth to come out. Presented with the evidence of his lies, Anagnostopoulos broke down and confessed to slaying his wife. The 33-year-old told investigators that he and Caroline had argued that night and claimed he killed her in a fit of rage during a moment of what he described as irrational anger. According to reports in Greek media, he said the fight escalated and he strangled Caroline with a pillow while their baby lay nearby. He then panicked and invented the robbery scenario to cover up what he had done. To make the scene believable, he staged the break-in meticulously. After killing Caroline, he smothered their dog and placed the crying baby next to her mother's body. He then tied his own hands and even used his nose to dial the police in a final macabre touch of theater. When Greek authorities announced the arrest of Caroline's husband, the public was stunned. The wheels of justice moved swiftly following the confession, and despite admitting he slew his wife, he didn't plead guilty. Instead, he claimed that this was a crime undertaken in the heat of an argument, and that it wasn't premeditated. In the ensuing trial, prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence painting the defendant as a sick puppy who had carefully planned his cover-up. Notably, because of the confession, it was never an issue whether he did it, but rather whether the entire thing was premeditated or not. They argued that his actions, before and after Caroline's death, showed clear intent and calculation, not a momentary loss of control. Caroline's diary entries, discovered hidden in a closet, were brought forward in court to illustrate the couple's troubled relationship. Excerpts from this secret diary revealed that she had planned to leave her husband and documented his violent behavior during their marriage. In May 2022, a Greek court unanimously found Anagnostopoulos guilty of Caroline's slaying, as well as the crime against the puppy. The court flatly rejected his plea that the killing was an act of passion done in the moment, concluding instead that the crime was deliberate. Disturbingly, forensic testing revealed that Caroline had been smothered while she slept. The court noted that this fact that contradicted the defendant's claims of a mutual altercation. This strongly suggested it had all been planned out long in advance. For his crimes, the court handed down the toughest sentence possible under Greek law: life in prison, plus an additional 11.5 years for his crimes against the puppy. The verdict was met with public relief and a sense that some justice had been achieved for Caroline Crouch. Anagnostopoulos attempted to appeal his conviction in 2023, with his lawyers arguing that the event wasn't premeditated. Unsurprisingly, this wasn't accepted by the court, which reaffirmed his life sentence plus the additional time. Hey everyone. It's Jimmy here, just taking a quick moment to promote my Patreon and the YouTube membership. You can support my insatiable desire for caffeine-related products for as little as $1 a month. Late on a warm spring evening in 2022, the quiet of an Austin home was shattered by gunfire. By the time the night was over, 25-year-old Anna Mariah Wilson, a rising star in competitive cycling, lay dead on a friend's bathroom floor. Her brutal slaying not only devastated the tight-knit cycling community, it also set in motion a tangled tale of jealousy, a frantic investigation, and a 43-day international manhunt. Mariah Wilson wasn't just a promising cyclist. She was already a standout in her sport, even seen as a potential future Olympian. At just 25, she had won several major off-road races and recently left her job to race full-time, marking her as one of the brightest new talents in American cycling. Wilson was originally from Vermont and had been a competitive skier before shifting her focus to bike racing. In May 2022, she traveled to Austin, Texas, to compete in the Gravel Locos race, a 150-mile gravel cycling event, and was among the favorites to win. She stayed with her friend Caitlin Cash while preparing for the competition. On the evening of May 11th, 2022, Wilson met up with fellow cyclist Colin Strickland, himself a top gravel racer and an old flame, for a swim at an Austin pool followed by dinner. Unbeknownst to Wilson, this outing infuriated Strickland's girlfriend, 34-year-old Caitlin Armstrong, a local yoga instructor. Armstrong had been with Strickland for 3 years and reportedly viewed Wilson as a romantic rival. During a brief break in her relationship with Armstrong some months earlier, Strickland had a short fling with Wilson, and it left lingering tensions between the three. Armstrong's jealousy had been simmering for a while. She had allegedly warned Wilson to stay away from Strickland and even once said she wanted to kill her. Wilson's family later stressed that she wasn't in any romantic relationship at the time of her death, which, if true, made the perceived love triangle one-sided. As Strickland rode away after dropping Wilson off at Cash's apartment around 8:30, a neighbor's security camera recorded something unusual. There was a black Jeep driving past the house just 1 minute after Wilson had arrived. When Caitlin Cash returned home around 10, she found Mariah Wilson on the bathroom floor, bleeding heavily from multiple gunshot wounds. Wilson's high-end bike was later discovered outside, tossed in the bushes, perhaps an attempt by the shooter to stage a robbery gone wrong. Cash called 911 and tried to revive her friend, but Wilson had been shot 3 times, twice in the head and once through the heart, and she could not be saved. Police quickly determined that this was a targeted attack rather than a burglary. They recovered shell casings near Wilson's body and learned from Cash that Wilson's last companion that night had been Colin Strickland. Strickland was cooperative and appeared genuinely distraught over Wilson's death. While the police obviously initially viewed him with deep suspicion, this avenue of investigation was extremely short-lived. He was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Investigators later confirmed he was on the phone at the time of the shooting. Detectives noted a black Jeep Cherokee parked at Strickland's home that matched the vehicle seen in the surveillance footage. A check of the license plate revealed it was registered to Caitlin Armstrong, immediately elevating Armstrong as the prime suspect. Once Armstrong was identified, detectives dug deeper into the trio's history. Strickland confirmed that he and Wilson had a brief romantic involvement during his break from Armstrong, but he insisted that was long over and that he and Wilson were just friends. To police, however, it was clear this situation had already ignited Caitlin Armstrong's rage. A friend of Wilson's told investigators that Armstrong had sent Wilson hostile messages in the preceding months to stay away from Strickland. Another acquaintance recalled Armstrong saying she wanted to shoot Wilson after learning about their past fling. This individual had thought this was just idle talk, simple hyperbole that people use when they're extremely angry over a situation. The forensic evidence reinforced these suspicions against Armstrong. Footage of Armstrong's Jeep near the crime scene at the crucial time was a critical clue. In addition, Strickland had purchased a gun for Armstrong a few months earlier, and ballistics tests later showed that shell casings from the bathroom floor matched that weapon. On May 17th, about 1 week after the attack, authorities obtained a warrant for Armstrong's arrest. They believed that she had tracked Wilson's movements, possibly through a fitness app on her phone, and then shot her in a fit of rage. Police had already spoken with Armstrong briefly on May 12th, when they brought her in under the pretense of an unrelated misdemeanor warrant. During that interview, when detectives revealed that her Jeep had been seen near the scene of Wilson's killing, Armstrong abruptly ended the questioning. Due to the nature of the warrant, officers had no legal way to detain her, and Armstrong was released, at which point she promptly vanished. Armstrong wasted no time fleeing. On May 14, 2022, Just 2 days after Wilson's death, she flew out of Austin and disappeared. Investigators soon discovered that she had sold her Jeep for about $12,000 in cash on May 13th and then caught a flight to New York City. From Newark Airport on May 18th, Armstrong used her sister's passport to board a flight to Costa Rica. Her sister later told detectives she never gave Caitlin permission to take that passport, and after further investigation, they came to believe it had indeed been stolen. U.S. Marshals and Texas detectives eventually tracked Armstrong to Costa Rica. They received numerous tips about where she may be living, including one then unverified claim that she was living in the remote beach town of Santa Teresa. This tip, the authorities would eventually find out, would turn out to be true. But for the time being, they were flooded with seemingly legitimate tips and couldn't investigate them all. There, living under the alias Ari, Armstrong had been hiding in plain sight among yogis and surfers at a hostel, teaching yoga classes and blending in with other travelers. She kept a low profile, telling new acquaintances that she had just gone through a bad breakup, a plausible story that raised no alarm in the laid-back Santa Teresa community. She had cut and dyed her hair, and even undergone cosmetic surgery on her nose to disguise her appearance. As the weeks passed with no sign of her returning home, the marshals devised a creative plan to flush her out. They posted a fake job ad online for a yoga instructor in Santa Teresa and got a lucky break when Armstrong, using her alias, responded to the inquiry, unwittingly revealing her location. Armed with this clue, authorities coordinated with Costa Rican law enforcement to surveil a local hostel. On June 29, 2022, after 43 days on the run, Caitlin Armstrong was captured by Costa Rican police at a hostel in Santa Teresa. She had altered her looks, but it wasn't enough. A search of her belongings turned up her sister's passport and a plastic surgery receipt, confirming her identity beyond doubt. Armstrong's international flight from justice had finally come to an end. Armstrong was quickly deported back to the United States and charged with Mariah Wilson's slaying. Held in a Texas jail on a very hefty $3.5 million bond due to her escape, she pleaded not guilty to the charges. In October 2023, while awaiting trial, Armstrong even attempted a daring escape during a medical appointment. She slipped out of her handcuffs and bolted away from officers, but was quickly tackled and recaptured within minutes, earning her an additional felony charge. Likely more problematic than this additional charge is that this evidence of the further escape attempt would be put before a jury as well. In November 2023, after a 2-week trial, a Travis County jury took only a few hours to find Caitlin Armstrong guilty. The following day, she was sentenced to 90 years in prison. Wilson's family, while grateful that justice was served, spoke of their profound grief. Her mother tearfully and poetically told Armstrong that by shooting Mariah in the heart, she had also pierced the hearts of everyone who loved her. Her father noted that although justice had been done, it was an outcome where everyone involved lost everything, and nobody really won. The 35-year-old Armstrong won't be eligible for parole for 30 years, meaning she'll be in her mid-60s before she can even seek release. In December 1990, just 4 years after the shocking death of basketball star Len Bias, tragedy struck the Bias family a second time. Len's younger brother, 20-year-old Jay Bias, was fatally shot in broad daylight outside a shopping mall, an act police would later describe as utterly senseless. This devastating attack unfolded at Prince George's Plaza in Hyattsville, Maryland, and it eerily culminated at the very same hospital where Len Bias had been pronounced dead. The story of Jay's slaying is a heartbreaking tale of a promising young man lost to completely senseless violence and the relentless pursuit of justice that followed. The Bias family had already endured a highly publicized tragedy before Jay's death. Jay's older brother was Len Bias, an All-American forward at the University of Maryland, and a top NBA draft pick in 1986. Len Bias's celebrated future with the Boston Celtics was cut short when he died of an overdose just 2 days after being drafted, shocking the sports world. His death at age 22 made national headlines and even prompted new federal anti-drug legislation as the nation grappled with the loss of the young star. Jay Bias grew up in the shadow of Len's legacy. He was also a talented basketball player in high school, though he never achieved the same fame. By 1990, Jay was working an ordinary job as a bank mailroom clerk and trying to move forward, even as his family dealt with their grief over the loss of Len. No one could have imagined that the Bias family would soon face yet another incomprehensible loss. On the afternoon of December 4th, 1990, Jay Bias's routine errand to a shopping mall turned deadly. Jay was on his lunch break and stopped at a jewelry store inside Prince George's Plaza to pick up a ring. There, by chance, he crossed paths with 24-year-old Jerry Samuel Tyler, a man whose wife happened to work at the same jewelry shop. According to witness accounts, what began as a brief friendly exchange between Jay and Tyler's wife quickly provoked Tyler's ire. Tyler accused Jay of flirting with his wife and began a heated argument inside the store. Jay tried to defuse the situation and even declined Tyler's challenge to step outside and fight it out. Instead, Jay finished his purchase and left the store with a female friend, attempting to walk away from the confrontation. Moments later, as Jay and his friend got into a Toyota 4Runner with two of Jay's co-workers, Tyler lay in wait. Tyler and an associate, 20-year-old Gerald Wynn Island, had gotten into a light green Mercedes-Benz and followed Jay into the parking lot. As the Toyota began to pull out, the Mercedes approached from behind. In a burst of violence, gunfire erupted from the Mercedes. Witnesses said Tyler, seated in the front passenger seat, leaned across the driver and opened fire with a semi-automatic out the driver's side window. 8 shots were fired in rapid succession, and Jay Bias was struck twice in the back. One of Jay's friends in the car later recalled in shock that it seemed like the shooter was never going to stop firing. The ambush was over within seconds, and the green Mercedes sped away, leaving Jay gravely wounded. Bystanders and Jay's friends rushed to help, but the injuries were catastrophic. Paramedics quickly arrived and transported Jay Bias to Leland Memorial Hospital in Riverdale, Maryland. This was the same emergency room where his brother Len had been pronounced dead 4 years earlier. Despite medical efforts, Jay was pronounced dead from his wounds roughly an hour and a half after the shooting. The killing of Jay Bias set off a massive police response and intense media coverage, given the high-profile connection to Len Bias. Investigators at the scene gathered eyewitness accounts that quickly pointed to the suspects in their getaway car. Several of Jay's companions and bystanders had gotten a clear look at the green Mercedes and its occupants. Within hours, Prince George's County Police identified Jerry Tyler as the prime suspect in the shooting. Rather than flee, Tyler chose a different path. That same evening, roughly 7 hours after the shooting, he turned himself in at a police station, accompanied by his mother. Tyler was promptly charged in Jay's death and booked into custody, where he would remain behind bars from that night forward. Meanwhile, police also sought Gerald Island, the alleged driver of the Mercedes, as an accomplice. Initially, Island remained at large in the immediate aftermath, but within days he was arrested and brought into the case as a co-defendant. Both men faced a slate of charges for what authorities dubbed an utterly senseless killing over a perceived slight. In Temple Hills, Maryland, more than 3,500 mourners gathered a few days later for Jay's funeral, filing through the church to pay respects. From the outset, police and prosecutors were confident they had the right suspects in custody, but the road to justice in Jay Bias's case would prove long and convoluted. Investigators learned that the deadly encounter stemmed from a chance meeting and a burst of temper. Jerry Tyler, the accused gunman, had gone to the mall that day reportedly in a foul mood, intending to confront his wife who worked at the jewelry store. When Tyler saw Jay chatting with her pleasantly, Tyler's jealousy and anger exploded, assuming that his wife was flirting with Jay. What Tyler didn't know was that Jay and his wife were actually old high school classmates, and they were just casually catching up with one another. This misunderstanding on the part of Jerry Tyler would lead to an event that would shatter numerous lives that day, including his own. Tyler freaked out and challenged Jay to a fight, to which Jay politely declined. Jay, by all accounts, did nothing to escalate the conflict, and he even tried to avoid a fight by walking away. But Tyler fetched a weapon and enlisted his friend Gerald Island to drive after Jay, turning a petty argument into a deadly ambush. Police recovered evidence and witness statements that placed Tyler and Island at the scene and identified Tyler as the one who fired the fatal shots. Within months, prosecutors in Prince George's County assembled a detailed case, and by the spring of 1991, the matter was headed to trial. The trial of Tyler and Island began in April 1991, less than 5 months after the tragic slaying. The state's evidence painted a vivid picture of the crime. Multiple eyewitnesses, including Jay's 2 friends in the Toyota, identified Tyler as the shooter. Ballistics matched his weapon to the shell casings found at the scene, and the pattern of bullet strikes was consistent with shots fired from the Mercedes. Prosecutors argued that Island wasn't an innocent bystander, but an accomplice who willfully aided Tyler. They claimed he drove the car and positioned it for Tyler to shoot, fully aware of what was about to happen. Under Maryland's accomplice liability law, Island could be found just as guilty as the shooter if the jury believed he knowingly participated in the deadly plan. Tyler and Island, the 2 friends who had participated in this act together, turned on one another at the trial. Tyler's defense team claimed that it was Island, not Tyler, who actually pulled the trigger, asserting that Tyler was being scapegoated by his friend. Island's attorneys, on the other hand, admitted that he drove the vehicle to the confrontation, but claimed he knew nothing about Tyler's plan or any weapon. Essentially, each man tried to pin the blame entirely on the other, creating a classic case of conflicting defenses. Despite this finger-pointing, the weight of evidence against Tyler was extremely strong. After a 3-day trial, the jury returned guilty verdicts for both men in April 1991. In the weeks that followed, Island was sentenced to 30 years in prison for his part in the crime, while Tyler, as the trigger man, faced the possibility of life in prison. And I have to say it here, I don't see how the prosecution proved that Island knew what was going to happen beyond a reasonable doubt, but we'll get to that in a moment. What seemed like the end of the legal saga in 1991 was only the beginning. Over the next several years, the case became mired in appeals and retrials that tested everyone's patience. In 1992, Maryland's Court of Special Appeals overturned the initial convictions on technical grounds, ruling that the first trial had been flawed. One major issue was that prosecutors had improperly excluded several potential jurors solely because they were women, a practice the appellate court deemed unlawful. As a result, Tyler's 1991 conviction was vacated, necessitating a retrial. Gerald Island's conviction was also overturned on appeal, meaning he too would be retried. Unlike Tyler, however, Island ultimately walked free. At his second trial, he was acquitted, the jury finding insufficient proof that he knowingly aided in the shooting. After Island's acquittal, the alleged driver could not be tried again, leaving Jerry Tyler solely in the crosshairs of justice for Jay Bias's death. And personally, looking at the evidence, I think acquitting Island was the right decision. The only evidence they had that Island was an active participant was from Tyler himself, and he proposed the absurd theory that Island was actually the shooter. This contradicts the evidence of the witnesses who actually saw Tyler doing the shooting. Jerry Tyler was tried a second time in 1994. By then, he had remained incarcerated, awaiting his fate while the appeals played out. The 1994 trial resulted in Tyler being convicted again, seemingly confirming the outcome of the first jury. But Tyler's legal battles didn't end there. In 1996, Maryland's highest court reviewed the case and overturned the 1994 conviction as well. The Court of Appeals found that the trial judge had allowed jurors to hear prior testimony from Gerald Island, testimony given in the 1991 trial. This was problematic as Island had refused to take the stand in the 1994 trial. Using Island's earlier statements without giving Tyler the chance to cross-examine him was deemed a violation of Tyler's rights, so the conviction was tossed. And I have to say here that I have absolutely no idea how the judge allowed this into evidence, despite Island refusing to testify. This meant that, incredibly, Jerry Tyler would face a third trial for the same attack. Finally, in November 1997, nearly 7 years after Jay Bias was killed, Prince George's County prosecutors brought Jerry Tyler to trial once more. They secured a guilty verdict for the third time. The jury in this third trial deliberated for over 6 hours, but ultimately agreed that the evidence proved Tyler was the shooter. At 32 years old, Tyler stood silently as the verdict was read, marking the end of a long cycle of convictions and appeals. Prosecutors expressed confidence that this conviction would finally stick, noting that Tyler had now received a fair trial. Indeed, the judge sentenced Jerry Tyler to life in prison for the brutal slaying of Jay Bias. Interestingly, Tyler had been offered a plea deal for a lesser charge before this third trial, but he refused, insisting on fighting the charges. If he had simply accepted the deal, he could have expected to be released in his late 30s at the earliest and his mid-40s at the latest. Instead, he has the rest of his life to consider the additional tragedy he inflicted upon the Bias family for no logical reason whatsoever. In the mid-1950s, New York City, the world's most bustling metropolis, was paralyzed by an anonymous presence capable of striking anywhere, anytime. For 16 years, this was the pervasive anxiety under which New Yorkers lived, driven by a phantom who planted bombs in libraries, phone booths, subways, and theaters. This individual, known to the public only as the Mad Bomber, instilled fear in every resident of the city. Between 1940 and 1956, he planted at least 33 homemade explosive devices across the city. 22 of those bombs detonated, injuring 15 innocent civilians, though thankfully none were fatal. While the physical casualty count remained relatively low, the psychological toll was devastating, turning communal, sacred public spaces into potential death traps. Investigators struggled desperately to find a motive or identity, hindered by the perpetrator's sole communication. Meticulously crafted notes written in block capitals, signed simply FP. Traditional police methods repeatedly failed to generate meaningful leads, leading to deep frustration within the police department. In the end, this case would be a key moment in the development of criminal profiling. The man behind the terror was George Peter Metesky, born in Connecticut in 1903 to Lithuanian immigrant parents. Metesky's early life suggested a highly competent and disciplined man. He served with the Marines after World War I, where he gained specialized skills as an electrician at the United States Consulate in Shanghai. After returning home, he settled in Waterbury, Connecticut, where he worked as a mechanic for a subsidiary of Consolidated Edison. His neighbors considered him somewhat of an oddball, and he lived the single life while residing with his two sisters. The pivotal event that unraveled Metesky's life occurred in 1931. While working as a generator wiper at the Hellgate generating plant in New York City, a boiler backfire produced a severe blast of hot gases. Metesky was knocked down, and the noxious fumes filled his lungs, causing him to choke. The accident left him physically disabled, and after receiving 26 weeks of sick pay, he was terminated from his job. Metesky claimed that the industrial exposure caused pneumonia that later developed into tuberculosis, a health outcome that Consolidated Edison actively disputed. Metesky filed a claim for workers' compensation benefits, but it was denied. The critical failure point was procedural. He had waited too long to file his initial claim, falling outside the statute of limitations. Over the next 5 years, Metesky filed 3 separate appeals against the denial, with the final appeal being rejected in 1936. His failure to be compensated for his injury, coupled with the loss of his livelihood, shattered his self-image and warped his perception of reality. Metesky's intense feeling of being unjustly victimized was aggravated by the bureaucratic nature of the system. His rage was triggered not by the initial injury, but by the legal technicality that negated his claim. This profound institutional rejection led to a psychological transformation, where his suffering metastasized into a targeted, personal vendetta. He developed a burning, paranoid hatred for the company's attorneys and for Consolidated Edison itself. A rational mind might accept the legal closure, but Metesky was suffering from what would later be understood as progressive paranoia. He interpreted the failure of the appeals process not as a procedural matter, but as definitive proof of a vast, deliberate conspiracy against him. Metesky's violent campaign began on November 16, 1940, with a calculated act of professional vengeance. He planted his first bomb on a windowsill at the Consolidated Edison power plant in Manhattan. The device was crude but effective, accompanied by a note in block lettering that left no doubt regarding the motive. I'll just read it out. Quote, "Con Edison crooks, this is for you." He also left a distinctive FP signature, which Metesky would later say stood for fair play. The chronological pattern of Metesky's attacks contained a crucial and unusual anomaly: the complete suspension of activities during World War II. Shortly after the United States entered the conflict in December 1941, the police received a letter stating that he would cease making bombs. He cited his patriotic feelings towards America and his desire not to in any way impede the war effort or cause any additional harm during that time. This began a 10-year hiatus where a man who was known as the Mad Bomber demonstrated an astonishing capacity for self-regulation. His deeply personal vendetta, though overwhelming, remained subordinate to his allegiance to the nation during wartime. When the attacks resumed in 1951, the targets broadened significantly, shifting from company property to locations designed to maximize media exposure and public terror. Metesky targeted high-traffic civilian gathering points, including Grand Central Terminal, the New York Public Library, the New York City subway, and the Port Authority bus terminal. He also targeted movie theaters, a dark space that allowed him to easily deposit a bomb in a way that could cause maximum fear without actually inflicting any deaths. The calculated pacing of Metesky's destruction, 33 bombs spread across 16 years, revealed a strategy focused on sustaining public spectacle. The bombs were designed to injure, damage property, and create pervasive terror, yet deliberately avoided mass lethality. By late 1956, the Mad Bomber case had become a national embarrassment, having brick-walled the largest law enforcement agency in the country for 16 years. With every traditional lead exhausted, the bomb squad's commanding officer made a desperate, groundbreaking decision. He consulted psychiatrist Dr. James Brussel, an action that was considered highly unusual at the time. Brussel, the Assistant Commissioner of Mental Hygiene for New York State, was asked to review the crime scene photos, the physical evidence, and the correspondence. He was then asked to create an emotional composite image of the offender, rather than a physical one. This consultation represented a radical, unprecedented embrace of forensic psychology, fundamentally changing how complex criminal investigations would be handled thereafter. Brussel immersed himself in the case materials, quickly diagnosing the elusive bomber as a textbook paranoid schizophrenic consumed by a specific, lifelong vendetta. He reasoned that a bomber who targeted massive public symbols and communicated exclusively through the press sought validation and acknowledgement. He confirmed that the motive was attention, not simply destruction, and he also determined that the mad bomber likely had no desire to take lives. Based on psychoanalytic theory and behavioral extrapolation, Brussel constructed a remarkably detailed psychological and demographic portrait of the perpetrator. The profile predicted the suspect would be unmarried, foreign-born, or the son of immigrants, and a self-educated, highly skilled mechanic. Brussel predicted the bomber would be in his 50s, using the premise that paranoia often peaks around age 35 and taking into account his 1940 debut. Crucially, the profile stipulated that the bomber harbored a specific, irrational hatred for Consolidated Edison, and that he would live outside New York City, likely in Connecticut. Brussel delved further into the bomber's inner psychology, and this is where things get a little weird. He speculated that the shape of the pipe bomb indicated that he had an Oedipal complex, and that he was probably a virgin who lived with female relatives. Perhaps the most famous prediction stemmed from this psychological assessment of the bomber's meticulous, controlling personality structure. He stated that when arrested, Metesky would be wearing a buttoned, double-breasted suit, and spoiler alert, this is what happened. Now, if I'm being honest with the evidence, I find this profile to be so on the nose as to be extremely suspicious. It almost sounds like someone such as a priest or a family physician may have communicated something to the police through back channels. From there, the commander of the bomb unit may have passed along the suspicions to Dr. Brussel, avoiding the professional ruin that would have come with directly outing Metesky. The other option is that Dr. Brussel is, in essence, a wizard, who was able to predict virtually everything about the mad bomber. Regardless, the Metesky case served as the crucible for validating criminal profiling, effectively transforming the practice from guesswork into a recognized investigative science. The extreme accuracy of the profile immediately bestowed credibility upon the nascent field. The police used this psychological framework to guide their investigative efforts, which included a tactical move suggested by Brussel: engaging the bomber's ego publicly. They published a letter urging him to come forward, which he did, but anonymously. He wrote a letter which reinforced his need to bring Con Edison to justice, and critically, supplied the precise date of his injury: September 5th, 1931. This date was the key that unlocked the paper trail, turning thousands of archival employee records into a list of targets. The profile had not named the man, but it had provided the essential filter needed to rapidly identify him from the available documentation. Either that, or the profile was created with the man in mind. But I digress. The investigative breakthrough came immediately after the publication of Metesky's response letter. Using the specific injury date of September 5th, 1931, investigators rapidly sifted through Consolidated Edison's employee files. Despite the passage of time, they were able to instantly locate George Metesky, a former mechanic residing in Connecticut, just as Dr. Brussel had predicted. The climax of the 16-year manhunt occurred shortly before midnight on January 21, 1957, when a squad of detectives converged on Metesky's quiet three-story house in Waterbury. The 54-year-old bachelor answered the door in burgundy pajamas and gold-rimmed glasses, exhibiting a polite grin and unnerving composure. Before the officers could even fully introduce themselves, Metesky confirmed their suspicions. He stated, quote, "I think I know why you fellas are here. You think I'm the mad bomber." Metesky cooperated immediately, leading them through the drab house where he lived with his two elderly sisters. In his meticulously maintained garage workshop, investigators discovered the equipment he used to craft the devices. Back inside, hidden behind washtubs in a closet, they found the components for future units. There were pipe lengths, connectors, cheap pocket watches, flashlight batteries, and the crucial evidence of wool socks, which were used to carry the explosives. Metesky's notebook contained handwriting that matched the block lettering on the notes. Then came the moment that validated the nascent field of criminal profiling entirely. A detective suggested Metesky get dressed for the trip to the Waterbury Police Headquarters. When Metesky reappeared, he was wearing a fastidiously neat ensemble. He wore sensible brown shoes, a red dotted necktie, a brown cardigan, and most tellingly, a buttoned, double-breasted blue suit. This dramatic fulfillment of Brussel's seemingly outlandish prediction instantly cemented the psychiatrist's reputation as a pioneer in forensic science. Again, that part is a bridge too far for me, since it's just way too specific. And I do have to say, you don't see modern criminal profiles make predictions with that level of extreme accuracy, despite decades of research and knowledge. Following his capture, Metesky admitted to placing 32 bombs. A grand jury heard testimony from 35 witnesses, leading to a massive indictment detailing 47 criminal charges. However, the case never went to trial. After extensive psychiatric evaluation, Metesky was diagnosed with incurable paranoid schizophrenia, and that was incurable by the standards of 1957, and things were rapidly changing. He was declared legally insane and incompetent to stand trial. In April 1957, Metesky was committed to the Mattawan State Hospital for the criminally insane. Ironically, getting caught almost certainly saved his life, as he had advanced tuberculosis. While in medical care, his physical health drastically improved, and in time he would become known as a friendly, cooperative inmate. The staff and other prisoners took a genuine liking to him, and Dr. Brussel came to visit him occasionally to shore up his findings. The doctor came to the opinion that Metesky had legitimately not tried to kill anyone during his campaign, and that he always took precautions to minimize harm. Of course, that's cold comfort to anyone who got hit with a bomb blast, though it's quite clear he had the skill and ability to make far more lethal bombs. Notably, a newspaper even hired a lawyer for him to dispute his workers' compensation claim. The attorney argued that because Metesky was suffering under delusions at the time when the limitation period was running, he couldn't have been aware of his legal rights. Ultimately, this appeal was unsuccessful, as Metesky had no medical evidence from 1931 to 1936, indicating that he was rendered psychologically incapable during the material times. Metesky remained committed for 17 years. His release in 1973 was dictated by evolving legal precedent. A Supreme Court ruling mandated that a mentally ill defendant couldn't be indefinitely confined unless a jury determined they were currently dangerous. Since Metesky was considered to pose no active threat, he was transferred to a civil state hospital, Creedmoor Psychiatric Center. The doctors there quickly determined that he had responded extremely well to treatment and would continue to do so. He was subsequently released later that same year. Upon his release, Metesky returned to his home in Waterbury, Connecticut. George Metesky lived quietly for 20 more years, passing away in 1994 at the age of 90, having been saved from severe tuberculosis by his arrest. The ultimate legacy of George Metesky isn't the damage he caused, but the investigative revolution he catalyzed. The astonishing precision of Dr. Brussels' psychological portrait, however it was reached, established a critical bridge between psychiatry and policing. This watershed moment validated the concept of synthesizing behavioral science and criminal investigation, ultimately leading to almost 20 seasons of Criminal Minds. And on a quick personal note, not that anyone asked, but that show was one of the ways I got so deep into true crime back in the day. It sounds like a plot twist from a true crime novel, a former adult film star entangled in a family love triangle and a truly gruesome decapitation. Yet this is the very real story of Devin Michaels, once known for her work in the adult entertainment industry. She was convicted of beheading her ex-husband, 46-year-old Jonathan Willett, in a shocking 2023 case. The brutality of the crime, combined with Michaels' unusual personal relationships, including a marriage to her ex-husband's son, captured national attention. Now, at age 47, Michaels is destined to spend at least 28 years behind bars for her crimes. Devin Michaels was born in 1978 in New Mexico, though little about her early life is known for certain. She built a name for herself as an adult film actress under the stage name Nikki Fairchild, performing in the industry through the early 2000s. During her career, Michaels gained a modest level of notoriety in the illicit entertainment world. Some sources indicate that she was married to another performer in the industry while she was active, though the details on this are minimal. After leaving the industry in 2012, she transitioned to a more conventional life, working as a real estate agent in Las Vegas. Michaels appeared to be settling down and focusing on family. However, this normal facade hid tumultuous relationships that would later make headlines. Michaels married Jonathan Willett in 2012, and the couple had 2 daughters together. They divorced in 2018. In a bizarre twist, she later married Jonathan's adult son, Devier Willett, essentially becoming both her ex-husband's wife and his daughter-in-law at the same time. Devier Willett was of course also married to someone who he may have called mom at one time, a truly disturbing occurrence. Michaels described both marriages as marriages of convenience, indicating they were practical arrangements rather than love matches. By 2023, Michaels was living with Devier and raising her 2 young daughters with him. She claimed the unusual marriage to her former stepson was intended to help with her medical issues and to support her children. Ironically, Jonathan Willett was planning to move back in with Michaels and the kids to co-parent and create a quote-unquote stable home for their girls. This was an arrangement that was underway just before he was eliminated. This precarious and quite frankly bizarre domestic setup was rife with underlying tension and set the stage for the tragedy that followed. On the night of August 6th, 2023, this fraught family situation turned deadly. Devin Michaels was with Jonathan Willett at the Henderson, Nevada home he shared with his mother. What happened next was nothing short of horrific. Prosecutors later revealed that Michaels struck 46-year-old Willett in the head with a heavy wooden candlestick. She then proceeded to chop off his head while he remained in that position. The attack occurred while Willett was in a vulnerable position, allegedly receiving a back massage from Michaels, meaning he never saw it coming. Michaels attempted to cover her tracks by pouring bleach and ammonia over Willett's body, which filled the room with noxious fumes. She then fled the scene. The next morning, August 7th, Jonathan's mother discovered her son's headless corpse wrapped in bloody blankets, with bottles of cleaning chemicals nearby. It was a scene of unimaginable horror. The distraught mother called the cops, and investigators quickly surmised what had occurred. They determined that Michaels had taken Willette's severed head with her when she left. Police believe she dumped the head in a dumpster or trash bin near her own residence, but despite exhaustive searches, it was never recovered. Henderson police quickly zeroed in on Devin Michaels as the prime suspect. She was the last person to see Willette alive, and the convoluted family dynamics provided an obvious motive to investigate. On August 15th, 2023, about a week after the killing, detectives arrested Michaels and charged her for this sick slaying. During interrogation, Michaels even agreed to a polygraph test as part of the investigation. She tried to explain the events as something other than premeditated. Michaels claimed that Willette had been violent toward her, and he alleged he had tried to force an illicit act on her just before the incident. She admitted she struck Willette in the head with a wooden stick while giving him a massage. However, she claimed she only meant to hurt him badly enough to figure out what to do about her situation. However, while Michaels confessed to the bludgeoning, she paradoxically denied carrying out the decapitation or disposing of the head. This denial rang hollow, as the physical evidence clearly indicated the killer had gone to extreme lengths to hide the victim's remains. For a time, it looked as if Michaels might avoid a public trial. In September 2024, she accepted a plea bargain and pleaded guilty to a reduced charge. This would have made her eligible for parole after roughly 15 years. But at her sentencing hearing in July 2025, Michaels suddenly reversed course. She proclaimed her innocence and attempted to withdraw the plea. The judge ruled that her plea had been entered voluntarily, but allowed it. The case was set for a jury trial, and the jurors weren't informed of the procedural issues prior, including the withdrawal at the sentencing hearing. Michaels' trial began in November 2025. Over about 2 weeks, prosecutors portrayed her as a cold and calculating killer who brutally eliminated Jonathan Willette. According to them, she did this to protect the life she had built with his son. They argued that she was unhappy about Jonathan moving into her household and feared his presence would disrupt her relationship with Deviere and the children. In fact, prosecutors highlighted a series of conscious decisions Michaels made that night to prove their case. This included getting up to retrieve a makeshift weapon, striking Willette while he was face down and defenseless, and then attempting to destroy evidence. The prosecution argued that this showed that the attack was premeditated rather than a moment of passion. They noted that Willette's wallet and keys were missing from the scene, suggesting an effort to stage a robbery or conceal evidence. Trial testimony even suggested that Michaels had been romantically involved with Deviere while still with Jonathan, implying an overlap that added to her motive of jealousy and betrayal. The defense, in contrast, offered an alternate culprit. Her attorneys claimed that Deviere Willette, the victim's son and Michaels' then-husband, was the real killer. They claimed he was acting out of his own envy and anger. According to the defense, Deviere couldn't bear the idea of his father moving in. According to them, this would ruin the home life he shared with Devin, so he allegedly knocked off his father in a fit of rage. Deviere took the stand in his stepmother's trial and emphatically denied any involvement in his father's death. No physical evidence tied him to the crime. Notably, this was a massive departure from Devin's original claim that Jonathan Willette had illicitly assaulted her during the massage on the night in question. Of course, this change in story did little to help Devin's already shattered credibility, a factor that jurors surely considered during deliberations. After hearing both sides, the jury ultimately rejected this attempt to shift blame. In November 2025, they found Devin Michaels guilty in the first degree. The jurors needed less than 2 hours of deliberation to reach their verdict, underscoring how strongly they sided with the prosecution's case. In January 2026, Judge Tierra Jones formally sentenced Michaels for the crime. The punishment was life in prison with the possibility of parole after 28 years. This sentence translates to a minimum of 20 years for the bludgeoning itself, plus an additional 8 years due to the use of a deadly weapon. Michaels will be in her mid-70s before she can even be considered for release. At sentencing, Michaels offered a brief statement acknowledging that nothing she could say would satisfy the victim's family. Notably, she stopped short of taking full responsibility for the gruesome act, likely in an attempt to keep the appeals process open. With Devin Michaels behind bars, Jonathan Willette's family has been left to pick up the pieces. His two daughters effectively lost both parents, their father to a heinous attack and their mother to a prison sentence. In the aftermath, Jonathan's father and stepmother assumed custody of the girls in hopes of providing some semblance of a stable upbringing. The family expressed relief that justice was served, though they know no punishment can bring Jonathan back. Anyway, this case will almost certainly be coming to Netflix at some point in the next year or so when it drops, you can say you learned about it here first. And yeah, you're probably not going to be surprised that I've got to drop my personal thoughts on this absolute dumpster fire. This case was never just about one slaying. It was a powder keg, a twisted family triangle loaded with jealousy, blurred lines, and old resentments. Devin Michaels married a man, divorced him, then married his son. And somehow, they all tried to coexist under one unstable roof, raising two young daughters caught in the middle. It's unclear what kind of dark tension simmers in such a situation simply because it's so unusual and so twisted. We have a verdict, we have a sentence, but we don't have clarity. The severed head was never found, and the true motives remain tangled at best. This case is what happens when there's a complete collapse of boundaries. Some stories end with justice, others just stop, but this one just lingers on. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to share this video with your friends and family. Also, don't forget that you can support my channel directly through a YouTube membership or by going over to the Patreon. On the night of July 10th, 2024, pedestrians crossing the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol were confronted with a horrifying scene. Bristol's famous bridge, normally a symbol of Victorian engineering, suddenly became the scene of a grisly mystery. Two large suitcases had been abandoned on the bridge, one of them ominously leaking blood. Alarmed bystanders reported a man acting suspiciously with heavy luggage before he fled and left the cases behind. When police arrived and opened the suitcases, they made a gruesome discovery: dismembered human body parts inside. The bridge was immediately shut down for an investigation, and investigators quickly determined that the remains belonged to two victims of a double slaying. But as detectives began to dig into what happened to these two men, something far more sinister and disturbing than they could have ever imagined emerged. Paul Longworth, 71, and Albert Alfonso, 62, were a long-standing couple from West London, described by neighbors as a friendly pair who seemed happy together. Alfonso worked as a swimming instructor, and Longworth was a retired handyman, ordinary men leading a quiet life. They lived in a Shepherd's Bush apartment, and in mid-2024 welcomed an unusual house guest, 34-year-old Justin Andres Mosquera. He was a Colombian adult actor whom they had befriended online years earlier. The trio had met face-to-face before. The couple visited Mosquera in Colombia, and he had stayed with them in England during earlier trips, which helped build trust between them. Mosquera stayed in their apartment for about a month and was intimately involved with Albert, a situation Paul was aware of and tolerated or even encouraged. Despite the unusual nature of this setup, all seemed well on the surface, but the couple had no idea that Mosquera was quietly harboring dark intentions during his stay. In the weeks before the slaying, Mosquera methodically prepared for his crime. He researched the couple's finances and the value of their West London home, hinting at a financial motive, and even ordered a large chest freezer to be delivered to their address. He also searched online for how long it takes a body to decompose, and where on the head a single blow would be fatal. These chilling steps painted a clear picture of deliberate premeditation. He even spent a significant amount of time researching some of Britain's most infamous serial predators, a macabre sign of his mindset before the attack. It seemed as though, while his motive was primarily financial in nature, he was also quite thrilled about what he was about to do to these two unsuspecting men. On July 8, 2024, Mosquera put his deadly plan into action inside the victim's own home. That afternoon, while Albert was at work, Mosquera bludgeoned Paul from behind with a hammer, delivering multiple blows to the 71-year-old's head. Paul died from the brutal head injuries, and Mosquera hid the body in a storage space under a bed, then waited for Albert to come home. Disturbingly, evidence indicates that Mosquera went about his business unbothered during this period, though of course we can't really know what was going through his head. When 62-year-old Albert Alfonso returned that evening, Mosquera initiated an encounter in Albert's bedroom, which was equipped with cameras. The footage captured Mosquera suddenly attacking Albert with a knife during an illicit act, stabbing him repeatedly and slashing his throat. This horrific slaying was caught on camera, evidence so graphic that even veteran detectives found it traumatizing to watch later. But then somehow it got worse. This recording wasn't some accidental incident. It appears to have been designed to document the horror. Afterward, Mosquera recorded himself singing and dancing in the bloodied flat, seemingly reveling in what he had done. With both victims dead, Mosquera turned to disposing of the evidence. He decapitated Paul and Albert and dismembered their bodies, placing some parts, including both heads, into the freezer at the condo, while stuffing other remains into 2 suitcases. 2 days later, on July 10th, Mosquera transported the suitcases over 100 miles to the city of Bristol, aiming to dump them near the Clifton Suspension Bridge. At the bridge, local residents noticed Mosquera struggling with the extremely heavy cases, from which a red liquid was very visibly dripping. When someone asked if he needed help, he nervously claimed the substance was oil, and even tried to knock away a witness's phone before bolting from the scene. Though Mosquera escaped into the night, he left crucial clues in the abandoned luggage. Alongside the gruesome contents, police found a baggage tag that led them straight to the victim's address in London. I've said it once before and I'll say it again, but we're incredibly lucky that criminals tend to be so stupid. That same night, Metropolitan police officers searched the Shepherd's Bush condo and uncovered the rest of the horror. In a hallway freezer, they found the decapitated heads of Paul and Albert, and nearby they recovered the blood-stained weapons. It was now unmistakable that the once trusted guest was simply a sick puppy in sheep's clothing. With Mosquera identified as the suspect, authorities launched a nationwide manhunt. Police even released his photograph to the public in an effort to track him down. Initially, they thought that he may have fled the country, fleeing back to Colombia and out of reach of British law enforcement. Thankfully, though, the search paid off quickly. On July 13th, 2024, just 3 days after the suitcase discovery, officers arrested Justin Andres Mosquera at a Bristol train station. He was promptly charged. Investigators later found that Mosquera had been preparing to flee the country. He had a flight to Colombia booked and had already accessed his boarding pass, indicating an escape plan that was foiled just in time. Mosquera's case went to court in 2025, exposing disturbing details and a web of lies he spun in hopes of evading full justice. He initially admitted that he eliminated Albert, but only to the lesser charge of manslaughter, claiming he, quote, lost control, and he completely denied slaying Paul. Unsurprisingly, prosecutors immediately rejected this ploy and pressed ahead with the full charges in both cases. During the trial, Mosquera concocted an elaborate defense. He claimed that Albert had been controlling him, and even alleged that Albert eliminated Paul in a jealous rage. Mosquera insisted he then slew Albert only out of fear for his own life after seeing the evil that he was capable of. The prosecution methodically dismantled these claims with evidence. They noted that Albert had no conceivable reason to harm his beloved partner, given the couple's well-documented relationship. In contrast, Mosquera's extensive online research, financial maneuvers, and the sheer brutality of the crime all pointed to a calculated plan. On July 21, 2025, after deliberating on all the evidence, a jury found Yosten Mosquera guilty of slaying both Paul Longworth and Albert Alfonso. 3 months later, on October 24, 2025, a judge sentenced him to life in prison, with a minimum of 42 years to serve before any possibility of parole. Mosquera will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars since parole isn't guaranteed by any means. The judge condemned the slayings as premeditated and utterly wicked, but decided not to impose a no-parole order. Personally, I find this highly disturbing given the acts that were committed, but the judge provided reasons. In explaining this decision, the judge noted that Mosquera had no prior criminal record and may have been brutalized in his youth after witnessing extreme violence. These were factors which weighed against a never-released sentence, at least according to the judge. But just when you thought you couldn't hate Mosquera anymore, and this judge's decision was perhaps deranged, it gets so much worse. As part of the proceedings, Mosquera also pleaded guilty to several counts of possessing the worst kind of images possible. His computer was full of the stuff, which again makes me question why someone of this nature would ever be allowed out on the streets again. I feel like the term sick puppy doesn't really do this monster justice. For the Metropolitan Police detectives who handled this case, it was one of the most harrowing investigations of their careers. Even seasoned officers were shaken by the sheer brutality of the crimes and the disturbing video evidence they had to review. The fact that Paul and Albert were slain in their own home by someone they had welcomed as a friend only deepened the tragedy. However, it is of course apparent that had they not involved themselves in a disturbing love triangle, this whole situation could have been avoided. In the pre-dawn darkness of November 13th, 2021, a black Toyota Prius with no license plates quietly rolled up to a Los Angeles emergency room. Masked men dumped a young woman's limp body at the entrance and sped off without a word. Hours later, another unconscious woman was left at a different hospital under eerily similar circumstances. These two friends, Christy Giles and Hilda Marcela Cabrales Arzola, had set out for a fun girls' night out, but their evening ended in unimaginable tragedy. Christy and Hilda were vibrant young women chasing big dreams in Los Angeles. Christy, 24, was a fashion model originally from Alabama, known by loved ones for her free-spirited, adventurous personality. Hilda, 26, was an architect and interior designer from Mexico who had moved to LA earlier in 2021 to advance her career. The two became fast friends after Hilda's relocation to Southern California, bonding over their shared ambitions. With Christy's husband out of town visiting family, the friends planned a much-needed girls' night out on Friday, November 12th, 2021. They began the evening at the trendy Soho House in West Hollywood and later headed to an all-night warehouse party in East LA around 1 a.m. The pair were excited to see one of their favorite DJs perform. Video from that night shows Christy and Hilda dancing together in the VIP section, having a carefree good time amid the crowd and music. Upbeat and sociable, the pair easily mingled with other partygoers. Sometime before dawn, they crossed paths with a group of 3 men who would dramatically alter the course of their night. Among these men was 40-year-old David Pierce, an aspiring Hollywood producer, accompanied by his roommate Brant Osborne and a friend, Michael Ansbach. Unbeknownst to the women, Pierce was not the industry big shot he claimed to be, but rather a dangerous predator hiding behind a Hollywood facade. As the warehouse party wound down, Christy and Hilda agreed to join the men for an after-party at Pierce's apartment on West Olympic Boulevard in Beverly Hills. Just before 5 a.m. on November 13th, they arrived at Pierce and Osborne's residence. Almost immediately, something felt off. Within 20 minutes of arriving, Christy texted Hilda, "Let's go," signaling her unease. Hilda replied that she was calling an Uber, which would arrive in 10 minutes. It appears the women sensed trouble and intended to leave in a hurry. However, that Uber came and went without picking anyone up. Doorbell camera footage later confirmed the rideshare driver left after no one met them outside. For reasons that remain unclear, Christy and Hilda never made it out of the apartment when they planned to. Their frantic text exchange would be the last communication between the two, and it hinted at the danger they were about to face. Over the next several hours inside Pierce's apartment, the once festive mood from the club turned into a nightmare. At some point, both women became unresponsive after ingesting a toxic cocktail of substances. Later toxicology reports showed Christy had a deadly combination of cocaine, fentanyl, ketamine, and GHB in her system. Hilda had also tested positive for cocaine, ecstasy, and other undetermined substances, leading to multiple organ failure. Pierce's acquaintance Michael Ansbach, who was present that morning, alleged that Pierce had handed them alcoholic drinks spiked with substances, even though both women had reportedly consumed some party drugs earlier in the night. Investigators believe it was the additional substances that ended their lives. In other words, what should have been a fun after-party turned fatal, allegedly due to Pierce providing a lethal mix of narcotics. What's especially chilling is that Pierce didn't call 911 when the women passed out. Instead, prosecutors say he and Osborne waited hours as the victims lay dying, rather than risk the authorities finding out what happened. At around 5 p.m. on November 13th, Pierce and Osborne loaded Christie's lifeless body into Pierce's Prius and drove her to a hospital in Culver City. Surveillance cameras and witnesses noted the car's license plates had been removed, and the 2 men wore masks as they carried Christie to the ER entrance. They told hospital staff they were just good Samaritans who had found her unconscious on a curb nearby. Before anyone could ask further questions, the pair fled, leaving Christie behind. She was soon pronounced dead on arrival, and staff immediately alerted police due to the suspicious circumstances. About 2 hours later, the same masked duo dumped Hilda at a different hospital in West Los Angeles, then again vanished. Hilda was barely clinging to life. Her body was cold, and she was suffering severe organ failure from the overdose. Doctors managed to resuscitate her and put her on life support. Tragically, Hilda would never regain consciousness. She died 11 days later, after being declared brain dead, just 1 day shy of her 27th birthday. The manner in which the women were abandoned made it immediately clear to law enforcement that this was no ordinary overdose case. Later in court, a jaw-dropping piece of testimony revealed Pierce's callous mindset during those crucial hours. Michael Ansbach, now a cooperating witness, recounted that when the women lay overdosing, Pierce made a truly disturbing statement. He turned to Osborne and remarked in chilling terms that once the girls were dead, they couldn't talk to the police. In Pierce's words, quote, "Dead girls don't talk." This alleged statement encapsulates the horrifying logic behind the delay. Pierce was more concerned with self-preservation than saving Christy or Hilda's lives. It also explains why he waited until one victim was already dead and the other at death's door before seeking medical help. With two young women mysteriously dumped and one already deceased, the Los Angeles Police Department launched an urgent investigation. Digital evidence soon proved invaluable in unraveling what happened. Christy's husband, Jan Cilliers, had been tracking her phone location that morning while he was out of town. He noticed Christy's phone had moved to an unfamiliar address on Olympic Boulevard, the location of Pierce's apartment, and later saw it ping at a hospital. Alarmed, Jan called the hospital and learned the devastating news that Christy had died in the ER. When he then discovered that Hilda had also been admitted to a different hospital in critical condition, his worst fears were confirmed. Jan quickly posted the strange Olympic Boulevard address on social media, asking if anyone knew who lived there. Almost immediately, responses poured in, warning that a man named David Pierce resided at that location, and that he had a very unsavory reputation. This online tip gave the first solid lead pointing to Pierce's involvement. Meanwhile, detectives followed the clues Christy and Hilda left behind. Using the phone GPS data, LAPD officers rushed to Pierce's residence and spotted a black Prius matching the description of the getaway car that had dropped off the victims. Photographs and videos from the warehouse party earlier that night further placed Pierce at the scene with the two women. Investigators even recovered text messages from the women's phones, including the 5:30 a.m. exchange about leaving, which corroborated the timeline. In essence, Christy and Hilda's own digital footprints helped solve their case. From location pings to text logs and party photos, each breadcrumb led police closer to the truth. Within a month, on December 16, 2021, LAPD, aided by an FBI fugitive task force, arrested David Pierce along with Brant Osborne and Michael Ansbach. Pierce was initially charged with manslaughter, while Osborne and Ansbach were held as accessories, accused of helping him dump the bodies. Notably, Osborne was dramatically taken into custody on a Hollywood film set where he was working as a background actor. If that's not evidence enough, these guys very much weren't the big shots they liked to claim to be in their attempts to lure women. As investigators dug into Pierce's background, a dark pattern emerged, revealing that this sick puppy had been a long-standing predator. Pierce had long presented himself as a suave, freelance entertainment planner or producer in Hollywood circles. In reality, prosecutors say he had been drugging and assaulting women across Los Angeles for nearly 2 decades. There's obviously a dark joke to be made there about the nature of some Hollywood producers, but I'll let you guys make it in the comments. Many of these alleged assaults followed a similar script to Christy and Hilda's case. Pierce would meet women in social settings, invite them to continue the party at his place, then secretly dose them with powerful drugs to render them defenseless. Between 2007 and 2020, at least 7 other women claim Pierce did horrific things to them in such a manner. In April 2022, the LA County Medical Examiner officially ruled the deaths of Giles and Cabrales Arzola as homicides caused by multiple drug intoxication. Pierce's legal troubles mounted. In addition to charges for the 2 deaths, he was later indicted by a grand jury and hit with multiple counts of attacks on other women. The web of accusations painted Pierce as a serial predator who had operated under the radar, leveraging the party scene and promises of Hollywood connections to prey on victims. Brant Osborne, his 45-year-old roommate, was charged as an accessory after the fact, accused of helping Pierce cover up the deadly overdose incident. Michael Ansbach, initially arrested as an accessory as well, was not ultimately charged. Instead, he agreed to testify for the prosecution. Ansbach's cooperation, including recounting Pierce's infamous "dead girls don't talk" comment, proved to be a critical piece of evidence during the trial. The case finally came to trial in early 2025, drawing widespread attention as a disturbing intersection of Hollywood nightlife and crime. Prosecutors argued that David Pierce had intentionally given Christy and Hilda a deadly concoction of substances so he could commit evil acts against them. The defense, on the other hand, contended that the women had voluntarily taken drugs at the rave and simply overdosed by accident. They even pointed to a piece of jewelry Christy wore, a locket containing a tiny spoon that tested positive for fentanyl, suggesting the victims had their own supply. But this claim rang hollow in the face of overwhelming evidence of Pierce's predatory behavior, as well as the testimony from Ansbach. In February 2025, a Los Angeles jury found David Pierce guilty on all counts. He was also convicted of multiple assaults related to the 7 other women who testified against him. Pierce showed little emotion as the verdict was read, while the victims' families wept in relief. Brant Osborne, tried alongside Pierce, avoided conviction for now. The jury was unable to reach a verdict on the accessory charges against him. This resulted in a mistrial and leaving prosecutors to consider a retrial for Osborne's role. Funny enough, the court later heard how Pierce had frantically Googled non-extradition countries after the women overdosed and was caught with $30,000 cash and a passport in his car. In October 2025, David Pierce was sentenced to 146 years to life in state prison, ensuring that this 43-year-old will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to share this video with your friends and family. Also, YouTube thinks you'll enjoy one of the videos on your screen right now, so check them out. In the early hours of August 13, 2018, a seemingly devoted father in Frederick, Colorado, committed an unthinkable crime that would soon shock the entire nation. Christopher Watts strangled his pregnant wife, Shannon, and smothered their 2 young daughters, Bella and Celeste, inside their home, then hid their bodies at a remote oil work site. At first, Chris maintained a facade of innocence, giving emotional TV interviews in which he pleaded for the safe return of his missing family. Within 2 days, however, his story collapsed. Confronted by investigators, Chris confessed to the sick acts, revealing a shocking betrayal. By all appearances, the Watts family lived an idyllic life. Chris and Shannon married in 2012 and moved into a spacious home in Frederick, Colorado. They had 2 young daughters, Bella and Celeste, and Shannon was 15 weeks pregnant with a son to be named Nico. Chris worked as an operator in the oil industry, while Shannon held a job at a children's hospital, and together they were building a life for their growing family. Shannon frequently shared cheerful Facebook posts about her love for Chris and their girls, calling him her rock, and praising him as a great dad. Friends saw Shannon as a doting mother, and noted how happy she seemed in her online updates. No one who knew them suspected anything was wrong beneath the happy surface. Behind closed doors, however, the Wattses had troubles. They had weathered some financial struggles. This included a bankruptcy filing in 2015 due to over $70,000 in consumer debt, but nothing outwardly indicated serious conflict in the marriage. On Monday, August 13, 2018, Shannon returned home from a late work trip, and by that afternoon she and the girls had seemingly vanished. When Shannon missed a scheduled prenatal appointment and failed to answer her phone, her friend Nicole Atkinson became concerned. Nicole went to the Watts house around midday, but found it empty, with no sign of Shannon or the children. Alarmed, she notified Chris and called police. Officers arrived for a welfare check and noted disturbing clues. Shannon's car was in the garage with the children's car seats still strapped inside. Inside the house, they found Shannon's purse, phone, and keys, as well as medication for the girls, all items she would normally have taken with her. Even her wedding ring had been left on a bedside table. It looked as if Shannon and the kids had simply vanished into thin air, leaving everything behind. As the frantic search got underway, Chris Watts insisted he had no idea what happened. He told police he last saw Shannon at about 5:15 a.m. when he left for work, and that they were gone when he got home. With his family missing, Chris appeared on local TV on August 14th, tearfully begging for their safe return. As he spoke to reporters, investigators, including the FBI and Colorado Bureau of Investigation, were on the scene with sniffer dogs, scouring the area for any trace of Shannon and the girls. To many who watched, however, something felt off, and it turned out their spidey senses were right. Chris's affect was oddly flat and calm as he spoke about his wife and daughters, which struck investigators and neighbors as unusual under the circumstances. While Chris played the part of the worried husband in public, police were already eyeing him with suspicion. On August 15th, 2018, 2 days after Shannon and the girls went missing, Chris Watts' story unraveled completely. And here we really have to be grateful that criminals are often very stupid people. He agreed to take a polygraph test and failed it. Confronted with the lie detector results, Chris suddenly confessed, but initially he spun a shocking tale to explain his actions. He claimed he strangled Shannon in a rage only after she had smothered the children during an argument. Unsurprisingly, investigators didn't buy this account. There was zero evidence that Shannon had harmed the little ones, and by then police knew Chris had been cheating on his wife, but more on his motives in a moment. Faced with the mounting contradictions, Chris eventually told authorities the full truth and admitted he alone was responsible for the sick acts. That same day, police arrested Chris Watts for the killing of his wife and children. Early the next morning, acting on information Chris provided, investigators made a grim discovery at an oil field owned by his employer. Shannon's body was recovered from a shallow grave, and the bodies of Bella and Celeste were found submerged in crude oil inside large storage tanks on the site. In the ensuing investigation, more disturbing details of the crime came to light. Chris admitted how he carried out the slayings, and it was even more horrifying than initially imagined. After Shannon returned home and confronted Chris about his affair, reportedly threatening to leave him and take the children, an argument erupted. In a fit of anger, Chris strangled Shannon in their bedroom, killing his 34-year-old wife and their unborn son in the process. Determined to cover up his actions, he then wrapped Shannon's body in a sheet and loaded it into the back of his truck. Shockingly, Chris also loaded Bella and Celeste, who were still alive and confused, into the truck. He drove the girls and their mother's body about 45 minutes to a remote oil storage site owned by Anadarko Petroleum, where he worked. Once there, the situation turned even more tragic, and I'm not going to give the full details because honestly, reading about this case messed me up. But I will say that Bella, the older sister, attempted to defend Celeste, but this sick monster showed no mercy. The lingering question was why Chris Watts committed such a monstrous act, and it soon became apparent that his motive was selfish and cold-blooded. Chris had been having an affair with a coworker, and he wanted to start a new life with this mistress without his wife and children. In the weeks before the slayings, Shannon had even confided to friends that she suspected Chris was cheating on her. He was growing distant and resentful, and the impending birth of their third child only increased the pressure. The household was also under financial strain, which added to the tension behind closed doors. Later, investigators learned that Chris had planned his crime in advance. And then things somehow got even worse and more heinous. And I can say without a doubt that Chris is one of the sickest puppies I've ever had the misfortune of covering. In letters from prison, he admitted he had given Shannon an opioid drug weeks earlier, hoping to cause her to miscarry their unborn baby so he wouldn't have another child with her. Facing overwhelming evidence, Chris Watts chose to avoid a trial. In November 2018, he pleaded guilty to all charges against him, in exchange for prosecutors not seeking the death penalty. Shannon's family was consulted by prosecutors and agreed to the deal, preferring to avoid a lengthy trial and appeals process. At the sentencing hearing, the full horror of Chris's deeds was recounted in court. Shannon's parents and brother gave emotional statements expressing their grief and heartbreak, and the judge then imposed the maximum sentence. Chris Watts received 5 life sentences without any possibility of parole for the slayings of Shannon, Bella, Celeste, and unborn Nico. For good measure, he also received an additional 84 years for a variety of other offenses he committed. For his own safety, Chris was moved to a prison out of state and remains in a maximum security facility in Wisconsin. Interestingly, this is one of the few cases where a family annihilator-type perpetrator doesn't end up removing himself from the world. He now has the rest of his life to consider the consequences of his disgusting and disturbed actions, which in my view may actually be a fate worse than death.